Yeah, just to start off, would like to just thank our sponsors, Peach Payments, who are our actual first official sponsors of the Tech Leadership Meetup. So starting last month. So just thanking them for the support that they give to the community and joining us on our tech leadership journey. Peach Payments makes online commerce and digital payment acceptance easier and more accessible all across Africa. So if that's something you're interested in or something you want to check out, go have a look at peachpayments.com. At the last few tech leadership meetups, we've mentioned that we've started a tech leadership newsletter, which is released once a month. It's always released just after the meetup of the month. So there'll be one issue going out at the end of the meetup today. The newsletter is basically a list of curated links of tech leadership material we've found over the month that we think is interesting enough to share with the community. So as an example, this would be the newsletter that went out last month. So as I said, it's just a list of links of curated content that we found interesting around leadership over the month. So if you're interested in this, I'll be sharing a link in the chat just after doing this intro. And you can just go to the previous page, which I was on, and you can drop your email and you can sign up and you'll receive this newsletter once a month. We also have a Twitter account, which is active. Also similar, we share curated links, but more frequently than once a month. There is usually at least a link going out every day, again, around tech leadership oriented content, and also announcements of who the next speakers and when the next meetups are. So that's that on the intros. And then now just to do a quick intro of our speaker for tonight, Adit. He's the CTO of Cape AI, and I'm just going to read through his comprehensive bio just before handing over to him to start his talk. So Adit has had an accelerated journey into technical leadership. He started his career in tech as a data scientist 4.5 years ago, knowing very little about the world of software development and artificial intelligence, but quickly grew comfortable diving deep into code and building AI products. Having always had a natural inclination towards leadership and connecting with people, 2.5 years later, Adit took on his first technical leadership role, leading a cross-functional team of software engineers and data scientists. And today, at the age of 27, he's currently the CTO of Cape AI, an artificial intelligence company that delivers AI consulting services to various industries and builds productizable AI in-house. Adit is passionate about creating and sustaining high-performance teams to create great technology, great techies, and inspirational technical leaders. He's a lover of all things data and tech, with a particular interest in artificial intelligence, entrepreneurship, and value-based leadership. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Adit, and you can take over from here.
Great, thanks Tanaka, and thanks to the Tech Leadership Meetup team for allowing me to present today. Just going to share my screen and then I'll kick off. So once I'm sharing, just let me know if you can see the presentation in presentation mode.
We can see it, Adit.
Okay, all right, cool. So good evening, everyone. As Tanaka said, I'm currently the CTO of Cape AI, and today the title of my talk was rather dramatic. I've titled it Tears in Transformation, and essentially I'm going to be talking through my journey as a young leader in tech. Now, that image on the right-hand side is just there, sort of like quite gimmicky, as you can see on screen. I mean, this is what I actually look like. But the reason I actually put that picture there is because I feel like I've aged quite a lot since starting out my career in tech. And as Tanaka touched on in that comprehensive bio of mine, like I've had an accelerated journey into like technical leadership roles, and it's been like a really interesting journey, which I think I don't have a lot of reference points, right? Being quite young. So essentially, the purpose of my talk today is to share my experiences and lessons learned as a young leader in tech along the way. So I know that Benny and Tanaka did say that if anyone has questions, you can post them in the chat and then we'll address that later. That's perfectly fine. However, if like you've got something pressing, I have no problem with you like, unmuting and just interrupting me to ask that question. It'll be nice to also get a bit of dialogue and conversation going on around that. Okay, so to dive straight into it, to talk about my journey, and I'll just sort of repeat a bit of what Tanaka had mentioned in my bio. So I had started out my career 4.5 years ago. Yeah, just about 4.5 years ago. And I started as a data scientist, and that was my first entry into the tech world. I actually studied industrial engineering. And so my educational background was very much geared towards like the traditional engineering discipline. And so I worked a bit in like the mining and manufacturing industries. I had done the whole, process optimization, improve things, which is kind of what like industrial engineers typically do. But the thing that it never quite excited me. And at the time when I was doing that and completing my studies, what I also did was, like data science and AI and machine learning were all of like these cool buzzwords. And so I figured, hey, this looks pretty interesting. I must really admit, like I didn't quite have a passion for engineering, but neither did I know what else did I have a passion for. So I thought that, these look like interesting things. This looks like an interesting field. How about I go and explore it a bit? And so I just kind of like self-taught myself in this field of machine learning and AI. And I was lucky enough to then get a job at APSA 4.5 years ago, which is where I started as a data scientist. Now, this was actually like, it was quite coincidental that I joined under what was known as just like the data stream. But as I joined APSA, I had just formed an AI team. And then I got thrown into this AI team without knowing, honestly, like hardly anything about AI. And so now I'm in this team and I'm working with people who are sitting with like their masters in computer science, and they've been at this, like they know what's happening, and they're quite confident, arguably arrogant, some of them. And like I didn't started to just like go straight for like just swim once I was thrown into the deep end. And so my first year of work was very much geared towards just upskilling myself technically. And so I found myself like, just spending a lot of after hours just tackling problems that I could find online, whether it's courses, watching a lot of YouTube videos, doing Kaggle competitions. And so this is how I started to basically just up myself and my confidence from a technical perspective. The thing, however, for me was always that the technical aspects never quite came naturally to me. So for me to become good at programming always required a lot more effort for me than, for example, just engaging with people, engaging with stakeholders, trying to understand problems, what is it we're trying to solve, and building relationships. So that part always came a lot more naturally to me than basically upskilling myself technically. But I still love the process. I love the rigor of having to force myself to become a lot more technical. And that's how I started to really love what I was doing and really got into the whole AI space. So this is where I then started to transition more from not just being a data scientist, but actually being this data scientist who bridged different gaps. So specifically, I found myself in a role where within a year of joining the team, I was leading a project. And because what I found I was able to do is I was able to translate business requirements and needs into technical requirements. Whereas like the others in my team were like hardcore techies, right? So that's how I sort of wiggled my way into a bit of a more niche role where I was starting to lead projects. And so that's where like my tech leadership journey really started. And so essentially what I first started doing is just emulating other leaders. Now, specifically, I must make a mention of my manager at APSA at the time was an exceptional leader. And he ended up playing many different roles for me. He was a coach, he was a mentor, but he was also like that guy who was tough on me when I needed to be tough. And what I found is that he sort of threw me into the deep end. And I started in this deep end, just emulating a lot of what he had done, right? And so by just watching him within that first year, within that second year of working and leading projects, my leadership style started being crafted. However, it was still very much influenced by him. So along the way throughout my presentation, I'll just share like anecdotes and stories of things that had happened throughout my career that sort of drive home the points that I'm trying to make. So in my second year, when I had first, started stepping into more of a project lead type role, so not actually like a team lead or anything, I had no direct reports or anything like that, but I was leading a project. And I kid you not, this project really, really drained me of all of my energy. The people I worked with were difficult. The project itself, I felt, was going nowhere and it didn't have a lot of value. But it's something that we had committed to. So it's something that we sort of stuck out for quite a while. And the thing that made it quite hard for me is that I was a lone ranger on this project. Now, some of the leadership qualities that I had started picking up and eventually learned to emulate from my manager at the time was some things quite poignant and hit home quite hard. So I specifically remember the one day on this project, I had sort of had it. And I told him, I was like, listen, this thing is going nowhere. I'm unhappy, I'm miserable, I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do. And so after letting me run all of these weeks without intervening, he stepped in with me to a meeting. He helped me to coordinate that entire meeting. I ended up saying nothing more than just greeting the people in the meeting and then leaving because I had just felt like very lost. But that's where I saw that he had sort of given me the opportunity to run with this. He had seen how far I could have taken it. And when I went to him for help, he stepped in and he helped. And that hit home for me quite hard because it showed me that, I guess like part of leadership and part of me also figuring out how to lead is in basically being able to work with autonomy, but also not separate yourself away from the processes where you actually are not supporting your people. So in this case, I felt empowered, but also supported. And I think that was a very important lesson for me and take home for me. And if I had to sort of sum it up, it's the takeaway for me there was that like good coaches don't play the game for you, right? But they're there to, as the word suggests, like coach you. I think it was Jose Mourinho who said like, you're not going to teach Cristiano Ronaldo how to take a penalty, right? So that's sort of like some of the qualities that I started picking up from him. And now my journey had started off where, I'm just developing my technical skills. Then I have to develop my technical skills as well as start to lead some projects. And then bam, 2.5 years later, he leaves the bank and he's like, okay, Adit, the team is yours now. So at this point, I'm working for 2.5 years. The team has not really changed much, but the people I'm working with are exceptional. They're really good at what they do. But the strange thing for me at this point is I've now been on this 2.5-year journey with these people as their colleagues, right? And so I'm now overnight thrusted into this position where it's like, okay, you're not just colleagues anymore, but Adit, you're responsible for leading this team. I did have someone who I co-led the team with, but at this point, like a lot of demons started entering my head. And the thing that I had to actually fight off quite strongly in the initial parts of my first tech leadership role was this whole friendship dynamic. Excuse me. So on the one hand, because these are people who are my age, I've worked with them, some of them are maybe even a bit older, the one part of me is saying, okay, I want to be a friend. I want to build relationships. I want them to like me. I want to have fun. Things should not be serious. Let's build a nice work culture. But then the other part of me is saying, hold on, I'm responsible and accountable for what this team does. I'm responsible and accountable for where we go and what we deliver. So I want results. I need results. I want high performance. I want commitment, dedication. I want to create urgency. And so the two just became like this huge conflict for me always in my head, where I had really struggled to separate, so to move beyond this whole like, I am your friend thing to I am your boss and I am your leader, right? So the two things were still like very discrete in my head. And I couldn't find any sort of in between. Now, the thing that sort of hit me along this journey was when one of the people in our team was actually, his performance was starting to drop quite a bit. He had lost motivation. He was going through some stuff personally, but basically like he just wasn't bringing himself to the table. And so at this point, I remember like having a lot of these conversations with him where I just wouldn't get straight to it, right? To be like, hey man, look, what you're doing is just not on at the moment. I need more from you. So what I had started with doing is just starting from like a place of empathy and saying, okay, talk to me, what's happening, right? And so once I got that context and I understood, okay, there's other dynamics here at play rather than just him not being motivated. I tried something and I said, okay, let's give him a bit of space and let's see if this works. The space didn't help. And so then I had to revisit this and I said, okay, well, we're still not getting what we need from here. Projects are being affected, delivery is being affected. So what's the next thing that I needed to do? And so what I constantly did for quite a while was I was like beating around the bush to just having a conversation with him and be very honest and say, hey man, look, this is not working out. When I say this is not working out, it's not like this is not working out, you're fired, goodbye. But it's like something needs to change. I never got to that point of actually giving him that feedback. And the funny realization for me here was a couple of months back, I had actually written a blog post on courageous conversations. And I revisited that blog post and I was like, look at all of these beautiful, wonderful things that I'm writing about and I'm telling everyone else to practice. But yeah, I am struggling with the exact same thing. And so what I eventually did was I mustered up the courage to just sit down and have a conversation and tell him like, look, some things have got to change because the way we're going about things now are just not working, right? And to my surprise, it is actually very well received. And some of the feedback that I'd gotten from there was that, Adit, it's better when you define your role for us. So if you come to us and you try to be our friend, but you also try and be our boss, and you're sort of like straddling between two, and you show that you're uncertain about this straddle between the two, then we don't know where we stand with you. And so you rather like tell me like these are some things that you expect from me, and it doesn't actually impact the fact that we had this friendship that we formed over the past 2.5 years, 3 years. So that was like an interesting realization for me that the thing that I saw as two discrete events or two discrete states, right? Like the friend and being a boss were actually not quite discrete, but they're like, you can make them, continuous. And it's all just about understanding what is the role that you have to play, and then trying to own that. Okay, so interesting challenge at that point. Now, what I eventually got into was I then changed jobs after 3 years. So I was leading the team at APSA for about 6 months before I got an opportunity to join KPI. And so when I joined KPI, excuse me, I joined KPI as their lead data scientist. And again, from day one, unexpected to me, I was sort of thrown into the deep end where they told me, okay, Adit, you're actually going to be the direct line manager for all of the data scientists in the company. So now I was like, okay, this is unexpected. But this time I was like, okay, no, I've done this. Let me see if I can do things better this time. Because now I don't know these people, right? Whereas at APSA, I was working with these people and then it was like, cool, now you need to be their leader. Now with my role at KPI, I was like, cool, let's see if I can establish myself as a leader pretty much from day one, because it's a fresh relationship, right? And that's exactly what I did. And so I was able to actually sort of get myself to own and be comfortable with leading teams and people from the get-go here, because I didn't have to deal with that. I had formed the relationship with you first before shifting to being a leader. But this new role actually started to uncover a lot of other things for me. And one of the things that I think everyone struggles with is imposter syndrome. Now, as a technical leader, I think like this is something that really hits hard, right? So what I found myself doing is I was thrown between two different spectrums to try and deal with this imposter syndrome. So on the one side of the spectrum, every time I felt like I wasn't good enough and why am I qualified to lead these people? Who am I? I started overcompensating and overworking myself, right? So in this particular instance, there would be several like moments last year where I'd find myself staying up to like 2 a.m. multiple nights in a week just to write extra code, just to knock out things that we need to do for clients. And in doing so, the message that I was giving myself in my head was, okay, Adit, by doing this, you're going to prove yourself and you're going to show them that you're not an imposter. So I started overcompensating. But then what had also happened is I found myself flying over to the opposite end of the spectrum, which was actually like retreating. So when imposter syndrome got the better of me, there would be moments where I'd be sitting in a meeting and I just wouldn't be able to say anything. All right. Now, this really scared me because what I'm trying to do is I'm telling myself, okay, I need to lead. I am the leader. So if I'm quiet, how does that reflect? Right. So people are going to be like, look at Adit, he doesn't know anything, or he's so quiet, or he's not adding value. And so I'm constantly flying between these two. And the fatigue that you actually feel when you move between this overcompensation and undercompensation is quite draining. It's quite exhausting, and it can really bring you down. So what had sort of happened, and this is now like happening continuously throughout my time at KPI till today. What I did was I had set up these one-on-one sessions with everyone in my team. All right. And so I do a checkpoint with every single person in my team every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or so. And in this session, what we had started to do is we had started to form some really, really nice relationships. Okay. And again, emulating from my previous manager, I realized that what you need to do is I'm going to start off with just ignoring anything project related. Let me try and get to know my people. And so it is interesting. I'd have conversations that sometimes would not touch on work at all, but all we'd be talking about is, okay, cool. This is your background. This is what you did this past weekend. This is your family. Oh, did you know about this funny story that happened to me? Like there was a lot of sharing that took place, which, you know, like if you think back, might seem like counterproductive because maybe that's not what a checkpoint is supposed to be. But the purpose that the checkpoints had served in its initial days of me leading the team was that I was able to form some really important and meaningful relationships with everyone. And the thing that actually stood out for me here was that imposter syndrome is not something that I'm struggling with alone, but actually the people who I think see me as imposters are themselves feeling like they're imposters. Okay. And I remember having one checkpoint and one of like arguably like one of the smartest data scientists in our company tells me, he's like, yo, Adit, I don't feel comfortable enough presenting this to the client because I don't think I'm smart enough. And so it hit me to say that one of the guys who I see as the smartest in our company is facing the same challenges. So something is broken here in our mental model of the world, right? We've got these expectations of what people may think about us or might feel about us, but without actually validating it, we go and we let that thought become truth. And that's very dangerous, right? And so something that I then started to consciously practice, but also try to drive through with my team till today is like, don't shoot yourself down without even trying, right? Like you got to get that validation, you got to seek that feedback. And so what we did is we started creating like this culture in the company that is all for feedback, that is all for candor, because ultimately we're there to grow ourselves and we're there to grow the company, right? And so if feedback is channeled properly, and I know that requires perhaps a different skill set, but what you can do is you can gradually get yourself as well as your team to fight this imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome was an interesting one to deal with, which was quite heavy in the early days of me leading. It's still something that I fight today. But in fact, I was telling Tanaka and Benny just before this call had started that as I was putting this presentation together, at every point, I kept like a thought kept entering my head to say, yeah, but Adit, if you say that, like someone might differ, or someone might think differently, or someone might challenge you, or think that what you're saying is rubbish. So it's like it's almost like natural, or it's become normalized for our minds to fight us with this. But I guess with like certain practices that we perform like quite regularly, we can start to like use that voice to actually channel us in a better direction. So these one-on-ones are now an important part of my journey here, because not only was it like growing everyone individually, but for me to understand what type of a leader I wanted to be, for me to understand what role I play in the company and to everyone else. A lot of lessons were learned from that, and a lot of like self-discovery and awareness came out from these one-on-ones. And interestingly, well, not interestingly, but I guess expectedly, high performance was something that we were naturally able to create as a company. And when I look back at it, like creating high performance teams can be achieved fairly easily if you've got smart people, if you've got exciting problems, and if you've got novelty, right? So if you've got something new, something fresh, whether that's the problem, whether that's the company itself, which is still fairly young, right? So if you have these three things, then you can pretty much, you'd have a high performance team, or you can create a high performance team. But what I then started to see is, as we're a high performance team, it's starting to reach a bit of a peak. And so I'm sensing this because in my one-on-ones, the energy I'm getting in the conversations is not quite the same. Or in team calls and meetings, you can sense that the energy levels are not quite where they should be, right? You find a lot more contention and people raising issues and things like that, which is inherently not a bad thing, but somehow in your intuition tells you things are not right. And so I started to ask myself, okay, how can this be sustained? And what is my role? Okay, so at every point in my journey, I've had to do like a lot of introspection to like figure out what's happening, right? What's happening in my environment and with the pieces that are moving around me. And so one of the first things is I found myself slipping into this trap of similar to the overcompensation. I found myself like doing that again. And the reason I was doing that is because I was like, look at our performance. We're knocking out code like no other team that I've worked with before. We're delivering results to our clients. Everyone's happy. High performance is sustained by hard work. And then my boss, Peter, who's the CEO of KPI, in one call starts to give me some more work and responsibility. And then I tell him, I was like, Peter, I genuinely don't think I can do this because I'm working at 120% capacity already. And so Peter tells me quite lovingly, if I put it this way, he's like, yeah, man, I think that's bullshit, because what the company needs from you now is not for you to work harder. What the company needs for you in order for us to grow is for you to work smarter. So this hit me hard. And so this got me thinking about this question that you see at the bottom. How can high performance be sustained? And what is my role as a leader in actually ensuring that this high performance is sustained? And so this is where I stumbled upon, it's not really stumbled upon because I was actually quite deliberate in it. But what I had done was I then started to watch like a ton of YouTube videos, TED Talks, whatever it is, like reading a lot of books around like leading teams and high performance and all of these things. And how do I make sure my people don't burn out? But more importantly, like, what is my role as a leader? And the first thing that hit me very hard, but made a lot of sense, is as a leader, one of my roles, this is like in my context, perhaps it's different, but one of the things that I need to make sure that I do is I need to identify who my anchors are for different things that I'm responsible for. So let me give you an example. Working in the AI space, the amount of literature that's published every single day, or new developments, new repos to be cloned on GitHub, everything is just moving on at such a quick pace that it's impossible for you to keep up with the latest, right? So what I had found is that there's one person in the company or two people in the company who are really good at research. And so what I had done is I had made them my research anchors. And so when it comes down to finding out about the latest in computer vision, I know I go to this person. And I know that if I have a chat with this person, I can be caught up because that's what they're good at. That's what they enjoy. And so I started to find these anchors. It's not something that I'd found overnight. Identifying these anchors had taken a while. I also found in who are my anchors when it came down to, for example, like leading certain parts of client projects in the consulting space. Or I'd found who are my anchors to basically connect with people at a very like human level when I'm not there and I'm not doing one-on-ones. So I'd started to find these anchors. And in finding these anchors, I actually found that I don't need to overcompensate or undercompensate in my role, right? We can ensure high performance because I am playing to my strengths and they are playing to their strengths. But the thing that has always been extremely close to my heart, which I do quite consciously, was in trying to understand people's value systems. And this is like a big part of these one-on-ones and these checkpoints, right? Because what I had to do is I had to very deliberately and consciously find out what are each individual's value systems, what's important to them. Because that day basically drove the information for me to say that these are the contributing factors to high performance. All right. So let me give you an example. So what I found is that almost everyone in the company values challenge. They value autonomy. And I'm drawing a blank now, but basically, like, if you think about it, like if you give someone an exciting problem to solve, and if you give them the autonomy to solve it, and that's what's really important to them, then that person's going to fly. You would have to do so little management in order to get results out of that person, right? So what I also then found like an important value is not just like on the technical side, what's important to people, but I found out that for a lot of people, like just having time out, like family is a really important value. For some people, family was not a very important value. For some people, like playing sport, right, was a really important value. And so what I found is that if someone messaged me to say, hey, Adit, is it okay if this Friday, like I just missed the first half of the day because I'm going to play a game of golf? I found that, you know, I'm better off just letting that person do their thing because it's not going to affect what I get from them. It's not going to affect our journey as a team, as a company. And so like as a leader, as a young leader, one of the very difficult things to do is firstly to like start a dialogue with yourself about what your value system is. Because once you know that, then you act based on your value system. And then you need to be very conscious about understanding the value systems of the people that you lead, because that is going to be the biggest source of information to guide your decisions when you're leading. So anchors and value systems are basically the combined with like, you know, combined with the one-on-ones and everything else that we did was sort of like how I've learned to actually sustain high performance. It's something you don't get right all the time. Your people will burn out. It's almost like inevitable, or at least I feel like it is. But I feel like we're getting better at it. I feel like I'm getting better at it and identifying what the triggers at these different points are. So all of this here has come down to like one value that I've been able to identify as like crucial, and this forms part of like KPI's core values as well. And that is like trust, which is this two-way street where you actually, you've got to go on a journey with someone and you've got to take that person on your journey as well. And so in my leadership journey so far, what I found is that I need to be sharing quite openly and honestly with everyone. This is where I'm at. And if they see that I'm sharing quite openly and honestly, they start to trust me and they share with me where is it that they are. And so now you've got this beautiful back and forward where you know where your people are at, you know what their headspace is like, you know what's important to them, you know what they want to do, what they don't want to do. And they also know that about you, right? And so you're able to create trust. So that's actually how trust, I found, is created, right? So take people on your journey. And at this point, I just want to give actually like a nice practical example of this. With the one-on-ones, one of the things I realized I was doing is I started asking a lot of questions in one-on-ones, right? Oh, so tell me, how's this going? Oh, cool. And how's so-and-so? And how's the project progress on this? And do you like this? So what I was doing is I was still very much guiding the conversations as opposed to letting people speak quite openly, right? So what I had experimented with a few one-on-ones was I said, let me try and be, what's the opposite of prescriptive? Non-prescriptive as possible in going into these one-on-ones, right? And what is really cool is when I gave a bit of silence in between like people speaking, my team members actually started to ask me about me. And so they're like, so Adit, how are you doing? I know that you've got a lot on your plate right now. Oh, you're planning a wedding next year. How's that going? And so they had started to inquire and ask about me. And it turns out that they wanted to know these things. But here Adit is thinking that, oh, he's a good leader if all he does is he wants to ask his people about them. And so we had started like sharing quite openly about anything and everything. And again, I was able to straddle that being a friend, but also being a leader. And I think like the results are really starting to show for themselves in our company. So it's been a fun journey so far. The last thing that I actually wanted to talk about on my journey that is still quite topical and difficult for me to get right today is the idea of self-promotion. Okay, now with self-promotion, what I was thinking to myself about is like, okay, we've got this awesome company culture. We all like trust each other. There's autonomy, there's excellence, there's high performance. We seem to be getting these things right. But something that you need to do as a leader is you need to be able to self-promote because you are at the forefront, right? And so you almost like represent a collective in many different circumstances. But this is an extremely uncomfortable thing to do. Like for me to go and post on LinkedIn about how I'm going to be talking at this tech leadership meetup was again something that like I had to fight a lot of demons in my head about because I was like, yeah, like what would people say? How would people think about this, right? And so like the idea of self-promoting is really, really cringe, and it still is for me today. It's something that I'm trying to work on. And again, if I just take myself back to like my lessons of like imposter syndrome, I realized that it's you got to just find certain practices that you can apply continuously, and in doing so, you hopefully drown out those voices that say that that want to invalidate something that you want to do. And so, self-promotion, similar to imposter syndrome, I found to be something that a lot of people struggle with. And so what I would do is I was find like small ways to self-promote, get that feedback before I shoot myself down, and then see like, okay, where to take it from here. But I think like self-promotion is a very important thing for young people, right? It's something that comes naturally to some and not so naturally to others. To techies, it's probably something that doesn't come very naturally. But the importance of self-promotion is by making sure that people see your value, right? And so one of the things that I've tried to cultivate in my team members is like this thing of just presenting and telling stories. And so whether that's to a stakeholder, whether that's the rest of the team, or whether that's at a meetup or a conference, like don't be afraid to do it, okay? Because it's these small shows and demonstrations of your value and your worth that the world deserves to see, right? And you shouldn't hold that back because of this thing possibly not going right. So self-promotion is something that's it's icky. It's still something we all struggle with. I really struggle with it. But it's been like a very important part of my leadership journey so far. And I know that going forward, it's still going to be very important. So at this point, I'm actually going to start to wrap up my presentation. And the thing that has become a question that I ask myself very often is the question of what energizes you? Well, I would ask me that, what energizes me? And this is a very important question because as a leader, if you don't know what are the things that energize you or take your energy away, then you will find yourself like very uncomfortable quite often. You will find yourself overworked. You will find yourself stressed and anxious, and imposter syndrome will kick in and all of these different things. But if you take the time to sit back and figure out, okay, today, these are the things that I did, and I tell you now, like this thing here drained me of my energy, then you start to become a lot more conscious about the decisions you make to prevent you from doing the things that drain your energy. So for me, one of the things that was quite influential was realizing that one of the things that really energizes me is just engaging with people, talking to people, building relationships, right? And so in weeks where all I was doing is just writing code, I actually found myself, no matter how successful and beautiful the code I had written is, I found myself quite drained and actually unhappy by the end of those weeks. But in the weeks where I found myself like, talking to people as well as writing a bit of code, I found that my energy levels were really high. And it's those energy levels that you take to your team. It's those energy levels that your team and the people you work with and who are around you see. So if you're not taking the time to actually identify what are your, I don't know, energy factors, then you'll often like fall into this trap of being unhappy or frustrated, but not actually knowing why. And so there's a lot of introspection that I've done and I still do today to try and identify what are the things that energize me. I know that this unpacks an entirely new conversation around like resilience and a whole lot of other things, but essentially like identify your energy triggers, because this will be like your guiding light in being able to lead, especially as a young person. And that is my talk for today. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adit. That was a great talk. I'm sure like there's so many things there that connected with people who are either experiencing exactly what you experienced or have gone through that. And I think Sean just said, thanks, dude. I think I couldn't say it better than he said when they said, wow, this hits at home when you're talking about imposter syndrome. And also just judging by the sheer number of questions that are waiting for you in the chat, yeah. I think everyone appreciated the talk. So I'd actually want to dive into the questions just so we can give you some time to answer them before we start wrapping up. So the first question comes from Benny, and he's asking, how did you create clarity around your leadership role and alleviate ambiguity amongst your friends?
Okay, so how I created clarity is very easy. I had a conversation where I said, okay, guys, we're going to talk about roles today. It's something I actually did quite recently as well in another project that I'm in. And I had told everyone very clearly, I was like, okay, I'm going to now play the part of, for example, project manager. And Aubrey, you're going to take care of the software engineering things, and Benjamin, you're going to take care of all of the data science things. So I had like clearly defined those roles. And what I did is like I proposed it to them, got some feedback, because I can't be like, I didn't want to be like too prescriptive in case there's something I'm missing, but at least I went forward with saying, okay, here's what I suggest we do. And it's like clear lines drawn.
Awesome. Thanks, Adit.
Cool. Thanks. And then from Prasheen, first off, there's great session, so some feedback there. And then 2 questions. What are the top 3 things which you know now that you wish you knew when you started from a leadership perspective? So very good question. And then another good one. What are some of the leadership books that you would recommend?
Okay, nice. The first one's a bit of a tricky one. I'll think about it, but I can go to the books, right? The most impactful leadership book for me has so far been Alex Ferguson's biography. So I love soccer, and so I always look to like sports as a really good reference for leadership in any sector. Another book is Satya Nadella's Hit Refresh. that was quite influential on me as well. And most recently, I just completed a book by Reed Hastings, who's Netflix's CEO. And so he's written a book called No Rules Rules. So that's also like influenced my leadership quite a lot. So those are like 3 really good books. If you haven't read either of them, I highly recommend them. 3 things that I wish I knew back then that I know now. I think like one of the things I did touch on was just around like, I think like defining roles is a very important thing. And as like Benny's question also wanted to know. So like, just like, don't be afraid to define roles and then take ownership of those roles. But then secondly, like this is a bit of a philosophical one, but like you don't have to have everything figured out. I think like in my early years, and I know I'm still young, so it sounds weird saying that, but if I look at like my time when I first took over like leading the team at APSA, I had sold myself on this thing of like, I need to know everything, because if I don't know everything, then the team will be lost without me, which is actually counterintuitive. Like you don't have to know everything. On the spot, I can't think of a third, but if I do think of a third, then I don't know, I can message people afterwards or whatever.
Cool. No, thanks for answering that. Great books, by the way. And the sidebar, I don't know if you're a Sir Alex Ferguson fan, his documentary came out on Friday. I think it's on Amazon Prime Video. So
can't wait to watch it. Yeah.
And we'll share the books also that you mentioned when we send out the link to the video in a couple of days. So thanks for recommending those. Just jump on to the next question. More positive feedback again. Amazing talk. Then the question starts off with a bit of a explanation there. So it's my counter to my imposter syndrome has also been to overcompensate in the effort I put in all those late hours. Problem is that it's not sustainable. I keep burning out after a few months. So do you have any alternatives to fighting it while still producing quality work?
Okay, cool. So I think like depending on your role here, there might be like overlaps, but also some unique things that you could do. So if you're in what we would call like the doer role, so you're the dev, you're the data scientist, you're the one writing code, then if you find yourself like working those extra hours, you've got to figure out, is that because what you guys are deciding to do is too much and the wrong things? Or you have to figure out whether it's your imposter syndrome that's driving the overworking, okay? Because I think like sometimes you can think it's imposter syndrome, but it might just be that your team's bad at planning, right? So start off as that as like your premise and figure out like, is it a planning issue or is it a me issue? And if it's a you issue, then what you need to do is it's probably talking to the fact that you're not clear with, let's say, like your manager on what they expect of you. And similarly, you need to understand, they need to know what you expect from them. All right. So have a conversation with your manager to say, look, I've gone through the sprint. I've completed all of the tickets that that was assigned to me. However, I slept at 2 a.m. every single night. Okay. And I know that what we've planned seems to be okay, but are you happy with my performance? And your manager may actually surprise you and say, you know, I didn't actually expect you to get all of those tickets knocked out, but great, thank you very much. In which case you could have done with a bit of extra sleep. Or he could then give you clear feedback to say like, yeah, look, you actually need to improve on this particular technical aspect, which is why you're working the extra nights, right? So then there's also like a skills issue that comes in there. So I think like with imposter syndrome, the best way to combat it is to start conversations with the people who you think are seeing you as imposters, right? And you're shooting in the dark until you get that validation and feedback. I hope that helps.
Awesome, thanks. Great answer. I think you could do a whole talk on imposter syndrome and possible solutions to it. But thanks a lot. From Roberto, did you feel it was easier being a manager in a place where you started off as an engineer, or it was better at KPI where people were learning about you at the same time?
Sorry, can you repeat it again?
So did you feel it was easier being a manager in a place where you started off as an engineer, or it was better at Cape AI where people were learning about you at the same time?
Oh, interesting. So I think like for me, I think like being a techie before being a technical leader definitely helps, right? Now, in my case, with my role like between APSA and KPI, I was technical in both roles. All right. The only difference is I wasn't given the designated title of leader at APSA until a certain point, whereas with KPI, I had stepped into it. But I think like the thing that was common between the two was the fact that like I had been through this this journey of like building relationships with the people that I work with. And in both cases, what I had to do was I did actually have to be close to the people I'm working with and show them that I'm coding along with them, right? So I think like in technical teams, it is very important for you to build that rapport beyond just us being friends, but actually showing them that, hey, I can talk your language. Because if we're talking the same language, then you start to, it contributes to trust, right? Which I was talking about as a big component. Does that answer the question?
Yes,
Rob?
very much so. Sorry, I've got a baby and a cat that's attacking me, so I want to turn on my camera. But yes, thank you.
Well, thanks, Roberto.
All right. And then the next question is, how do you manage focus? So deep work with administrative tasks.
Yeah, it's my biggest issue at the moment, seriously. So the way I do it is if I know I've got technical things assigned to me, I have to block out my calendar. So how my days are typically playing out, especially now in my role, is the day is primarily spent, you know, in meetings, or strategic things, or dealing with issues. And so in which case I don't bother starting to write code until I know I've got, let's say like at least a 3-hour gap where I could actually get into a bit of deep focus. Unfortunately, what happens is often that deep focus time only comes after hours. So I would open up my laptop at about like 10 at night and then get to those things. But what I'd found does not work is trying to context switch too much. So if you're going from one meeting where you're talking about the direction of the company and the future of our people into the next session where you're building a web app, like your brain's not going to switch very quickly. And if from there you're moving into another session where you're dealing with a conflict with an employee, like you'll be even more useless in that conversation than if you had just given yourself maybe half an hour to not code and just go into that session fresh. So for me, deep focus and try to avoid context switching as best as possible. And just another like very practical tip that's working well for me is like, I get quite strict with the way I set up my calendar now. So if I can see that like meetings are not being clustered very well together, then like I always get back to people and I say like, hey, can we move this? Or if I know I've got a lot of work to do, then I try and push out meetings and then I try and get into the deep focus. So you can like control your calendar.
All right, another good answer. And I think, okay, there's a lot of positive feedback, which I think you should read through once we wrap up with the questions. But one last question, which just came in. Great talk, Adit. Question from my time. What is your morning routine? Do you wake up at 4 a.m. and jog on the beach?
I wish I had a cool routine to talk you guys through to seem like I've got everything figured out. My morning routine is get out of bed, have a shower, grab a cup of coffee, and then get to work. I think something that I can actually talk to that works better for me is actually like having a clear evening routine. So what I do is without fail, I close my laptop by 5 every single night. And if I do have work to do later that day, I will only open up my laptop after like 9:30. So the reason I do this is because then I work till like a little bit later, and then I don't wake up super early. I'm not a very early bird, but I make sure that I leave like 5 hours at least where I'm doing nothing but just maybe sitting with family or seeing to my own personal stuff. So it's my evening routine that's actually more important in my day-to-day.
All right. Thank you so much for going through the questions. I will give you a couple of seconds to read through the feedback and everything in the chat while I just do the wrap up, and then I'll get back to you. So yeah, just to wrap up again, just going to repeat a couple of things mentioned at the start in case some people hadn't joined. So we have a tech leadership newsletter that goes out once a month after the meetup. And today we'll be issuing out another one. It's basically a curated list of links that are around tech leadership specific topics. So if you want to receive that, we'll be sending it out maybe 20 to 30 minutes after the meetup. We'll share the links in the chat again just after this, and you can just sign up with your email. We also have a tech leadership Twitter account, which also shares tech leadership oriented content, but more on a daily basis. So at least a tweet a day with links again to tech leadership content. And once again, just to say thank you to our new sponsors, Peach Payments. Thank you for supporting our community and joining us on this journey. Peach Payments makes online commerce and digital payment acceptance easier and more accessible across Africa. So if you're interested in that, please just go check them out on their website at peachpayments.com. And just to wrap up, back to our speaker, Adit. Thank you so much for the talk. This was really amazing and useful, and I think some of the most questions we've got and feedback while the talk has been going on. It's customary from the tech leadership community to share a book with the speaker as a gift, and that is sponsored by Matchbox Solutions, which is Benny's company. So we'll be in touch with you to hear about which book you're interested in getting from us, and just to say thank you for that. And finally, just to wrap up, thank you to everyone for joining us. For those who've returned in the past, hope it was another good one. And for those who it was their first time attending the Tech Leadership Meetup, hopefully we'll have you join us again on the first Tuesday next month. So that's it for today. Cheers and goodbye.
Cheers.